welcome back. Once again, my name is Gretch and I'm with Never Tox. And this evening I'm going to be sharing two more stories of women who unfortunately have struggled with illness from having botulinum injections, or what we are referring to as Botox illness. And then I'm also going to be sharing about a video that I learned about recently that I found to be so interesting, and I actually linked it from YouTube onto our blog so that you can go and watch that at any time. And then I'll also put a link here in the video notes so that you can check that out. But what the video is it is actually by Dr. Carruthers, and she is the woman who is responsible for pioneering or finding out that botulinum toxin smooths wrinkles on the face. Now, she is actually an ophthalmologist, and she was searching for treatment for her patients for blepharospasms, or abnormal spasms of the eye or blinking, and she found out that botulinum toxin was a very effective treatment in that, and paralyzing those muscles in the face so that they no longer contracted in that way. And so the one thing that I really enjoyed the most from the video was that it became very apparent that Dr. Carruthers is a very passionate doctor, and she truly cares about her patients and wants to help them. And so I enjoyed that part of the video. However, being that she is a doctor and she's also married to another doctor, a dermatologist, when they realized the wrinkle smoothing effect of botulinum, they quickly moved from using it for just a treatment for eye spasms to cosmetic usage. And the interesting thing to me was that she actually, in early trials, had her husband experiment on her. And she even says in her own words that I haven't frowned since 1987. That is a really long time to not move your face. And so my mind immediately jumps to, well, my goodness, how many injections has she had throughout the years? And so, I definitely worry about her, and we can only speculate, how her health is, or if she's experienced any negative side effects. We don't know. We can only speculate. So I just thought that I would link that video. I think it's really interesting, and I like to understand the history of how drugs come to be, and so I thought others out there might like that as well. Okay, so one reason why it made me so nervous for this woman to find out that she had used so much botulinum is that we believe that botulinum injections harm the body with every single use, every single time. Okay, and so we just want to make sure that we are conveying that, because at its best, from the research that we have done, Botox only paralyzes the nerves. Okay, that's at its best. But at its worst, it can cause full-blown botulism, or symptoms that are consistent with botulism, complete with respiratory distress, okay, and also cardiac failures. And so that is just something that we want to make sure that everyone out there understands. This is a real possibility, and should you choose to use botulinum, this can happen. Botox has what we call a summation effect, okay, or a cumulative effect. And so when people have used botulinum multiple times, or they get their injections every 3 or 4 months, or some people go longer, 7 months, 8 months, or even maybe once a year, at first, when Botox or botulinum poisons the body, one may not notice its effects, okay? And that's because they're subtle. And this isn't always the case for everybody. There are some people who get stricken sick right away. But for others, the poisoning happens over a much longer period of time. And it's kind of like when you take an axe and you're trying to chop down a tree. The first few whacks don't really do much. But then all of a sudden, timber, the entire tree falls down. And so that analogy is actually one that I have received from a researcher gal that is in our support group, and it really, struck a chord with me. It makes perfect sense, and that's why, from the people that I have talked to, there's such a great difference between, there's such vast differences between, people who get sick right away, and then others who say, I don't understand, I've had Botox so many times and nothing ever happened to me. and then all of a sudden they are very, very sick. So in the people who do get sick right away, it's what we call inadvertent botulism. And that's when the botulinum toxin actually hits a blood vessel, and the toxin is absorbed in every body system, through the bloodstream. And that is where it is quickly picked up by the central nervous system, okay, and it is dispersed basically throughout the entire body. And this can also result in muscle fatigue, that can progress to full-blown botulism, that can also have respiratory collapse or even respiratory failure. And so I just want to make sure that viewers out there read the black box warning label, because it says this very clearly in it. And so I will actually be linking that from manufacturer websites. From the four, you need to learn these names: Botox, Dysport, Xeomin, and the newest, Jeuveau, okay? Which, funny, they're calling the new tox. And here we are, Never Tox. No, Never Tox. But anyway, okay, so I will put those below in the page notes, okay? So for the story number one that I have to share this evening is actually kind of more of a summary style story. And I'm just gonna go ahead and read it and go from there. The following are quotes from a woman who recently experienced botulinum toxin spread past the injection site. She received Dysport for crow's feet in October 2019. 1 week after her injections, she developed heart rate spikes with a resting heart rate of 184. I'm just going to pause there for a second, because I know for me at my age, 184 is actually my maximum heart rate. Okay, so 220 minus your age, that's how you'll know what your max heart rate is. But hers was 184 at rest. She had a general feeling of being unwell combined with tightness in the chest, which at the time she dismissed. Unfortunately, 2 weeks after her first injections, she went in for a touch-up for her forehead and bunny lines. Those are the ones right here, we call them bunny lines, by her nose. And it was exactly 1 week later that her horror and hell with Dysport illness began. It started with severe anxiety and panic, which wouldn't subside. She has currently developed multiple symptoms of toxin spread. So in April of 2020, this is a direct quote from what she had written, and she says, "Currently, my legs and arms feel like jelly. I have a paralyzed, numb feeling. I have to force myself to walk. I feel like my body is switching on and off. I am worried that I'm going to die. I have internal shaking and I can't stop crying because I'm scared." And then just a few days later, in the middle of the night, she wrote, "My symptoms are worse than they have ever been. I am giving in to benzos and antidepressants. Tomorrow, when I speak with my GP, I cannot stand this 24/7 debilitating anxiety and nervousness. I cannot sit still. I have constant severe panic for no reason, insomnia, and pain in my heart. I can't calm myself down no matter what I try to do. I've taken all sorts of natural meds and nothing is helping at all. I cannot look after my child. I cannot look after myself. I have started to have breathing issues and chest pain. This is a living hell, and I pray to God that I find some form of relief with medication, because that is all that is left for me now. My heart goes out to all of those who are suffering like me. I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy." And then she wrote, "Not that I have one anyway." And as hard as it is to read quotes like these, we know that this information needs to get out there. From one mother to another, we want people to realize, and moms to understand, that this is something that can happen. You can be so severely ill that you can't even take care of your children. And we hear it all the time. Women feel so horrible that they lose time. They lose precious time with their loved ones because they can't function the way that they used to. And so our heart breaks every single time, we read a story like this and we talk to people who have gone through this. It's very tough. And it's really tough, when you've lived it. And it's kind of like one of those things that you don't know until you know. The next story is actually more of like a word-for-word story. It's less summarized. This is pretty recent. It's from July of 2019. I was injected by my dermatologist. The day after injections, I experienced a sudden onset of extreme nausea and a headache. It eased up a little in the following days, but it never really went away. The following 6 weeks after my injections, I started to experience increasing dizziness, occasional intense vertigo, headaches, and continuing nausea. Around week 6, my left arm went completely numb like pins and needles. This was in the middle of the day and lasted for several hours. My headaches also started to feel really unusual. It was like a pressure behind my eyes. At week 7, I went to the doctor who prescribed me antibiotics and also steroids, thinking it might be a sinus infection. During the course of that next week, while I was on antibiotics, my headaches got worse, and I started to develop a slew of other symptoms. A neck pain that radiated up and down my neck in waves, a now continuous dull headache, along with waves of head pain that felt like an ice cream headache. I also had an intense pressure that radiated up the sides and around the front part of my head. My ears were plugged, and I had jaw pain. Some of the milder symptoms I experienced on and off were aching and weakness in my right leg, on and off tingling in my left arm, issues with swallowing, and then she says not just like trouble swallowing or lazy swallowing. It was like food wasn't making it all the way down her esophagus when she would eat. And lastly, tinnitus. I should also mention that right after the injections, I thought that the vertical vein in my forehead, from the center of my forehead up to my hairline, appeared to be darker than before. And I'm just going to pause there for a second, because this is something that I have noticed frequently. I noticed it with my sister, just within a few days after she received her injections. She had always had, yes, she had the 11 lines here on her forehead, but her forehead was primarily pretty smooth. It wasn't like you could see any facial veins or anything like that. But after her injections, you could, and especially when I was just standing a couple feet away from her and her face was sort of tilted just right in the light, it was almost like it looked like a tree or something, like right up in her forehead. It was very strange, and I see this frequently now on people everywhere I go, and I think to myself, and I'll watch their faces to see if they move, and they usually don't, and I'm like, I think that they've had Botox. It's just interesting to me. But anyway, she says that she noticed it appeared darker than before. And so for a number of weeks, that area was also tender and sore when she touched it. And then she says, strangely, it was not the area that was injected. Around that time, I started to suspect that Botox was the culprit. So this was at 7 weeks. My doctor ordered a CAT scan, which ruled out a sinus infection, and blood tests were normal. Later, I saw a neurologist who ordered an MRI, which was also normal. The dermatologist who injected me was very supportive and reported my experience to Allergan, but she had said that she had never seen this experience with any of her other patients or had even heard of this happening to anyone before. I also reported my experience to the FDA. At 16 weeks out, my symptoms improved little by little. I was still dealing with mild headaches, less intense waves of nausea, and being dizzy. And the waves of pressure in my head, ears, and jaw had also become less frequent and painful. At around 4.5 months out, I had a few weeks where I felt almost back to normal, but unfortunately, right at 5 months out, I got worse again. My remaining worst symptom has been being nauseated. This was accompanied by a horrible, restless, and uneasy feeling. The feeling was concentrated in my legs, but it also was in my core, if that makes sense. I noticed that this feeling improved with exercise and walking, and the swallowing issues and head pressure also seemed to improve with walking. Now, at 9.5 months out, I'm still dealing with headaches, being nauseated, and an occasional feeling of a lump and regurgitating in my esophagus, which doesn't bother me as much now. However, the most annoying thing for me is this feeling that I can describe just like what I've read for restless leg syndrome. I have an aching, unsettled feeling like I want to jump out of my skin, mostly in my legs, but also in my arms and core when it's particularly bad. Fortunately, I've definitely had some weeks where I have felt almost back to normal. We love hearing that. But then it's followed by a bad week or two, and I've noticed that this very closely follows my menstrual cycle. I feel bad on the day I ovulate, then progressively worse until I get my cycle, and then it subsides and starts over again. It's not like I'm in any major pain anymore, just persistent discomfort. Exercise in the morning continues to make me feel better, but I definitely feel worse when I have sugar, caffeine, or alcohol. So none of that for me. Hopefully, as I come up on a year post, I will start to feel even better. I have heard from others in my situation that the first year of Botox illness is the worst. And that is our experience as well. We hear that the first year is really the most excruciating, and then symptoms tend to wane from there. And that's just in most cases. Some people recover, much more quickly than that. It just is all dependent on the amount of botulinum toxin that was absorbed into your body, into your bloodstream. There are some people that I'm talking to right now who unfortunately are 6 years out and still waiting for improvement on their symptoms, and it's difficult. It's difficult to continue to encourage them to hang in there. Time is the greatest healer, and community is what we have found. Now, there are some things that can be done should you be suffering, and we will definitely be going over that information. But for now, we're just going to keep it with stories. I hope you enjoyed this video this evening, and I will be back in the days to come with more. And we've got some exciting things headed our way. We've got lots of people who have been inspired and have decided that they want to make their own videos as well. So it won't always be me telling the stories, and that's really exciting. So I will see you again soon.